Hello, and in this Mac app development tutorial we're going to talk about how to pass literal strings around in your code that you're using for naming things around the proper way. So we're not talking about how to actually create names or how to name things intelligently, philosophically. We're talking about how to actually pass the names to the Swift programming language. So in the last few versions of Swift, Apple dramatically changed how you name things like notifications and your nib files and your storyboards and even images to use an entirely new architecture where if you're a novice you might not do what you think you would do, where just pass a little string. Often you have to wrap your name in another initializer, which can seem very complicated and frankly pointless. Today we're going to talk about why that is and see why it's actually really good. But in brief, well, the benefits that gives us is basically what we do is create a constant that we can then that wraps the initialization of that name, and the benefit of that is that we can then pass it around in our application. We can get syntax highlighting for it because it's not just a little string; it's a thing that the editor recognizes that gives us auto completion, and also because we're not just passing around a little string, Swift can type check better what we're doing. So without further ado, let's dive into the example project I've got here. It's actually one that I used in the previous video. So if you watched that video, you'll remember that we had this example line of code. I just created a window controller and I initialized it with this main window controller command. Now, main window controller, when you pass nsnib.name, you used to take a little string, but now you have to wrap it in this window nib name. And if like me, you might think, well, I'm just passing a string to this anyway, and this works. So what am I really gaining here? Well, here you're not gaining anything. It's just extra characters because it's the improper way to do it. And so you might think, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, if we go to the definition of this thing here, we can see it's an extension on the nsnib class, and if you're doing notification.name or image.name, it's an extension on the image class or the notification class, and it doesn't store any values or properties. It just has an init, but it's up to us to add properties to it that we can then use in our application. So let me give you an example of how we would do that. What's the proper way to refactor this? Well, what we're going to do is create another file to put our naming code in, and I'm just going to say new file. I'm going to call it, just say that it's a Swift file, and I'm going to call mine naming extensions. If I create that file, because one of the things that we want to extend is part of Cocoa. We need to import Cocoa rather than just importing Foundation. And now we're going to create our extension. So what is an extension? Well, an extension is a way to add functionality, properties, or even methods to a class that you don't have access to. And we actually want to add our constant to the nib.name struct that we saw, which we obviously, because that's in Apple's code, we don't have access to modify that, so that's why we need to use an extension. So we're going to say extension nsnib.name, and here we're just going to put anything that we want to add to it. What do we want to add to it? Well, we want to add a reference to that, to the name of our window. So I'm just going to say static let, because it's a constant. We're going to let an extension on the nib name be called main, and that's going to be equal to an initialization of the parent class, so an instance of nsnib.name. And why do we have to say the why in our extension do we have to set an why do we have to initialize an instance of ourselves? It's because that's what functions that take these values are expecting. So we need to say nsnib.name and give our name. So in my case that was main window. So now we can use that. I like to when I create a new file like this, just build and run my application so that everything saves correctly. And if I now go back to my main window controller where we need to set this value, we see instead of window nib names, I can now just call window nib and then my extension on it, so .main. And this allows us to scope things really nicely, because I now know that this thing that I'm calling is definitely an nsnib.name, and there's no confusion about that. In fact, because this function is expecting a nib.name for that value, I don't have to say nib.name, I can just say .main rather than because it's inferred by type inference. So if I rerun this, we can see that it's obviously still working. But you might say all we've done is replaced one file name with another. Well, when does this become useful? Well, it's useful anywhere a variable is useful, where we might need to reference it more than once. So, for example, in this case, I have a view here that has a post a notification, and all it does is say when this view button gets added to it, a notification gets sent saying that, which is received by our app delegate, and our app delegate then is responsible for printing that a notification was received. What's the problem with this? Well, instead of using by doing it this way, by passing a literal string, you're basically fighting against Apple's APIs, because Apple made you wrap it in this notification.name and didn't allow you to pass in a literal string. So bypassing a literal string to that, you're basically fighting Apple's API. So how do we refactor this properly? Well, I'm just going to do it in the same file, keep all my extensions together, and obviously we're extending a different thing this time. So I'm going to say extension, and this time we're extending notification dot name, and like before, we're going to add a static let, which I'm just going to call got data, because that's what this notification represents, and we're going to again set that equal to an instance of itself. Notification dot name equals data got, and obviously if I build and run just to make sure it compiles, I can replace it here, which we've already seen. It's no big deal. I can just say notification.name got data. But the big deal is that I can use this basically anywhere in my app. So when I post a notification, I can use this name, and when I get the notification, I can use this name. So I can change it in one place without having to worry about updating all those literal strings. And this is particularly useful for notifications, because we often need to respond to notifications in multiple places. It's one of the big benefits of notifications. So in this case, I'm just going to change the literal string to say got data, and if we run that, if I press this button, my notification still gets received. So it's still working. A couple more examples I want to show you. There's an example that's a little different to the other ones. If I go into my Cool View controller, I've got a button that gets added programmatically, and then I want to add an action to it, but target action uses this old Objective-C API. Normally would use closures now, but this target action syntax, when I want to press a button do this thing, is from Objective-C, and it uses this old syntax where we pass in a selector as a raw string, which is basically a method name. As you can see, I've got a method called button pressed on that button, so when it's clicked, it runs this method called button pressed. But if we look at this, I've even got a modifier here to say that's wrong, and I should use # selector syntax rather than creating a literal string. So if I say fix it, what's the benefit in that? Well, you can see that it's not in quotes, and I get normal syntax highlighting. What's the benefit in that? Well, it means Swift can check that this method actually exists rather than just creating it at runtime. So if I say button pressed, I get suggestions which I wouldn't get if it was just a literal string. So those are just a few examples of kind of names in Swift, but it's all over the place. And one of the key benefits of this is that the same kind of logic is used to interface with Apple's framework. So if I say, for example, import AV Foundation, which is to do with using audio and video, and I say dot notification name dot AV Foundation, look at all these notifications that have been defined as constants that I can register for without having to know the exact name of the notification name, because I get that autocomplete because it's actually an object that the compiler can deal with rather than just an abstract string. So I think I've drummed the point home there, but it's a really important area of Swift development to get familiar with, and will really help you. I think if nothing else, it cuts down on your kind of redundant code, because you don't say whatever dot name for anything and then just pass in a literal string. It's probably the case that if you're only ever using something once in your app, the overhead of creating an extension and certainly a struct isn't worth it, but in most of the time it is. And it's one of those situations where even if you don't think you'll end up using more than once, you likely will do in the future. So that was an example of how to correctly work with names in Swift. Now, some people would argue that this isn't correct at all, because extensions on Apple's frameworks that are usually reserved for generic things. So if I wanted to create something that creates a random colour, that's not a method on the NSColor object, but it would be useful to all people who wanted to use NSColor. It's not specific to this app. Any app could use a random colour, but not any app could use the names that are specific to my app. So there's some disagreement about that, but I think extensions are a good way to use, and I think the fact that Apple have moved all their APIs to this way is a testament that they think it's a good thing to use. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this extremely long video. I hope it was useful, because there isn't that much information about this online, and if nothing else, you know why they moved to that weird notification.name rather than just passing in a nice easy string, because I was confused about that to start with. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.